The art film. It is a film about a 15-year-old ballerina who is desperate to reach her dream to pass the Royal Ballet audition before she exceeds the maximum age limit, which is 16. Little does she realize she's gambling her life away and will soon push herself too far to turn back. Being a surrealism and psychological film, the film flashes between two different alternate worlds, one where she's dancing and one where she's gambling. The idea of gambling works as a metaphor for the arts. It is a symbol that showcases the parallel connection between being a ballerina and being an artist, and how pursuing that sort of career is basically gambling your life away. In the actual story, or in the world of the film, she's not actually gambling being a 15-year-old, but she is gambling in the sense that she is gambling her future away by pursuing a very impossible career. She eventually becomes so invested in both worlds that the line between them becomes blurred, which is showcased through this unique hairpin narrative structure, which I will soon explain. The genre, like said before, is more surrealism and psychological, but the plot itself is more like a young adult drama, similarly to films like Black Swan or Whiplash, which are psychological but more targeted towards young adults. In terms of the aesthetic, it is an art house inspired film. I've taken a lot of inspiration from artists such as Wes Anderson, as well as films like The Great Gatsby. Another few inspirations I have taken into consideration is Whiplash, Black Swan, and I, Tonya, all films that follow the same idea of an artist pursuing a very impossible and difficult dream. Some music videos I've also considered in terms of the aesthetic and cinematography that I want to try and mimic are ideas such as Russian Roulette by Red Velvet and Dice by NMIX. As we can see here, I have 4 comparable films, Whiplash and Black Swan being my focus on like the general plot line being about an artist, while Memento is my inspiration in terms of the narrative structure, flickering between 2 different parallel worlds. Of course, in Memento, it's the same world, but it flickers between the main character's memory and reality, while in my sense, I'm flickering between reality and a heightened version of an artist's reality as they're gambling their life away. And also follows that same hairpin structure where the scenes eventually become shorter and shorter in length and become blurred towards the end as the 2 worlds combine. Another comparable film is The Great Gatsby, which I've taken into consideration in terms of the mise-en-scène and how the director of photography has created the very elaborate artistic sets of casinos during the 1920s. My film, though, is not set in the 1920s, but set in current times, but it does take into inspiration that casino, rich, lavish vibe when the main character is gambling. As stated before, the narrative of my plot follows an unconventional bookend hairpin style structure. The film consists of 2 worlds, the artist's life and the gambling world, that flicker between each other, symbolizing the concept of how the protagonist's art career is turning into a gamble. The narrative builds in conflict, such as the protagonist's internal conflict within herself, as well as the conflict between her and her teacher, being strict on her, and her boyfriend, which showcases how her love for her art is affecting her relationships. The tension increases like a linear narrative, but instead of reaching a climax that is followed by a resolution, it reaches a climax where the character completely burns out, which is influenced by her boyfriend breaking up with her over the phone while she's already overstimulated by the amount of study and ballet work she is yet to complete. Following this, the resolution follows her giving her very last bit of energy into her craft before she reaches the tragedy part of the narrative when she finds out she failed the audition and therefore lost in her gambling game. Here we can see a visual representation of the narrative that I want to create. The first image being a representation or a visual diagram of Christopher Nolan's narrative structure, the hairpin narrative structure, where he flickers between two of the worlds represented in the film, the 22 polychromatic scenes and the 22 monochromatic scenes that slowly shorten in length and blend together towards the end. In the second image, we can see a structure of the Shakespearean tragedy, which I'm taking inspiration from in the sense where once I reach the climax of the film, I get into the tragic force, which is similar in the sense where my character does experience a downfall, although she doesn't die, but she does experience a tragedy where she ends in a way that is worse than the way that she began the story. Towards the end, there's a glimpse of restored order, of course not in the character because she failed her audition, but there's a little glimpse in the way that despite this tragedy, society has changed in the slightest. Not in the film, but I want to have the idea that society has changed in real life, as in the audience is now shown a unique story that they have not seen on film before, and hopefully have a different idea of how artists' struggle is represented. The protagonist I have chosen for the film is Haru, who is a 16-year-old female studying to be a classical dancer, which I will show her aesthetic later. Throughout the narrative, the protagonist flashes between reality and the heightened version of the artist's reality, which I stated before. In the introductory scene, she is shown on a stage alone, tired, and covered with bruises and all that gory stuff, which foreshadows her future. Later, she is shown practicing in rehearsal rooms, studying at her desk, working out, before slipping into the gambling world where she begins playing poker, Wheel of Fortune, and pachinko slots. This contrast in actions is showing a symbolic meaning of how her practicing in rehearsal rooms and her studying is equally as gambling as playing things like poker and Wheel of Fortune. They're both the same idea of gambling, which I've shown side by side. She eventually becomes so invested in both worlds, desperately trying to win in ballet and in gambling, not literally gambling though, that the line between the worlds becomes blurred and she eventually burns herself out. Through this bookend narrative, the film showcases the arc the character experiences, which is unconventional to mainstream media. The character's art begins neutral, living an average and uneventful life, just practicing to be a ballerina, which slowly grows in tension and then plummets into downfall. The target audience I've aimed my film towards is people who appreciate the arts, whether they're artists themselves or fans of artists. So people who appreciate modern day trends and aesthetic films, people who are academics who like to study films, and people who have an appreciation towards unique narratives and unique cinematography. People who also value hard work, and people who are sympathetic and empathetic towards struggles of hardworking artists. The intention of my film is to produce an aesthetically pleasing film with smooth, satisfying transitions between the life of an artist and a heightened version, the gambling world. And the purpose of my film is to show my audience an insight into the world of a pursuing, struggling artist. For some, it would have been a new side of the art industry that they've never seen before, while to others, it might be something relatable. For those similar artists who relate to my film, I would like to offer them a sense of comfort that they are not alone in their struggles, and hopefully it'll be a sign for them to not give up on their dreams, regardless of the pain and other people's negative opinions towards their craft. Now we'll take a quick look into my artist's stylistic choices. The first mood board being full of dull, desaturated pastels, beige tones. It represents the warm aesthetic of a dance studio and like ballet in general, while it also works to create a color palette that showcases the dull reality of real life, or the dull aesthetic of real life. Contrasting to this, I have the casino kind of aesthetic, which showcases bright, highly saturated, contrasting reds, pinks, and blues, lots of neon colors, which not only showcases the like very iconic semiotic of a casino, but it also works to create a symbolic idea of warning, such as the blue and the red being symbolic of police lights or like warning sirens. I've also chosen a few sets and locations, one of the main ones being Be Lucky and Sons. It's not in a casino because I have limitations of where I can film legally, but also because the actors that I want to choose, I want them to be actually underage, so it creates that youthful look, as in it creates the idea that, oh, wow, these artists who are struggling actually really young, and it makes the actors look much more realistically young than getting an overage actor who just happens to look young. Finally, here's a quote that I've taken into consideration when creating this film by Diane Nguyen in BoJack Horseman. Because if I don't, that means that all the damage I got isn't good damage, it's just damage. I've gotten nothing out of it, and all those years I was miserable was for nothing. Thank you for listening to my presentation.